Located on the Evansdale campus, the new arena will be open to the public sometime early this summer. It promises to be one of the basketball showplaces of the country.
3-on-1 break. They're going wild here at the Coliseum.
There's magic in the Coliseum. When that crowd gets in here and gets to hooping and hollering, and the student body and they're going crazy and everything's electric, then our players really get pumped up and make some shots and do some things. And I think it also has a tendency to demoralize the other team some.
Straight away, 3-ball. Yes!
Oh, my goodness, when you care enough to send it very best, send it home.
The Coliseum's a wonderful building. It will continue to be a wonderful building.
The WVU Coliseum is a beautiful place to play basketball. It was designed to play basketball.
The fans, the support that we get, how dedicated the people are.
Now Wellington Smith, a desperation heave. It's good for 3 at the horn.
Brooks with the ball, down the floor to Boyd. Here comes Boyd. He slams it. It's going to be all over.
It goes in. Owens at the buzzer for the win.
That's a West Virginia winner.
The Baylor Bears lose for the first time this season. West Virginia knocks off the #1 team in the nation.
The West Virginia University Mountaineers have knocked off the Big 12 Conference regular season champion Jayhawks of Kansas.
Chase sets a cross screen, tries to break Staten free. Staten makes the catch. Staten's over midcourt. Staten takes the ball to the left side, spins, shoots, layup, shot, good! 3.9 seconds to go. West Virginia leads. Kansas throws the ball down the floor. Shot is up, no good. Ball game's over. West Virginia's won the game. And the Coliseum has gone absolutely bonkers.
Little frosty. #1 Kansas falls at Morgantown.
The WVU Coliseum has become a mausoleum for another #1 team. For the second time this season, West Virginia knocks off #1. Clock's at 10. Here's Haley penetrating to the bucket. Layup, good! 8 seconds to go. Rebound, no good! It's over! West Virginia wins!
Now they get to sing. Well, there's a lot of fun stuff around college basketball. There's not much more fun than here at Country Roads in the West Virginia University Coliseum.
Every time I wore that uniform, I felt something really special. And it was something that I will never forget.
What my parents taught me so many years ago, that every time you play, you're playing for your university and you're playing for your state.
Absolutely thrilled to death by this. It's one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me in sports, and I am so proud to be a Mountaineer.
It is one of the best atmospheres in all of college basketball, the West Virginia Coliseum.
This place is electric. It's going to be fun.
This is one of the great environments. There are no pro teams in the state of West Virginia. They love West Virginia sports right here.
Maurice Robinson.
Dale Blaney.
Kirby Brooks on the 2-pointers.
We're glad to have you this afternoon.
Here at the Coliseum in Morgantown, West Virginia and Pitt in basketball.
Jack Fleming, there's no other like him.
Deshaun's over midcourt. He spins. Deshaun spins. Fires up a 3. It's up. Good! With 1.8 seconds to go.
They love themselves some hoops here in this state.
Open man, Malone.
Right down.
Left wing for Gansey. 3 in the air. Swish! That's a school record.
Carter stole the ball. But this is Press Virginia. Press Virginia. They have taken out Big Ten Ohio State.
Now we're rolling. We're rolling now, baby.
And ball to Frank Young with 3 on the clock. A long 3 up. In! Oh, how do you like Frank Young early?
Green takes it down and slams it.
The accolades, of course, go to you and to Will Robinson, who was named the most valuable player.
The Country Roads taking game day home to Morgantown. You guys were awesome this morning. Thank you so much for coming out early.
Pitt's not a spree. Yes! And Pitt's going to take a timeout.
Here comes Brooks. Boom! Such a rich basketball heritage here.
It should be an outstanding afternoon of basketball here at the Coliseum in Morgantown.
Throws it midcourt.
To Kevin Jones. A slam dunk, Kevin Jones.
and West Virginia holds out the Hokies.
So number 2 UCLA goes down to West Virginia.
Javon Carter is in Trey Young's head.
Gowans drives in. His dunk is blocked by Konate.
He tries to throw it down, and it's met by Konate again. Wow!
Staten starts to drive. All the way to the basket. Layup is up. It's good with 5 seconds to go.
And all the people of Morgantown go bananas!
It is a great night to be a Mountaineer wherever you may be.
I've just been blessed to be able to coach. It's great to be home.
Jerome Anderson.
Darryl Prue. Devin Evac.
43 points for Deshaun Butler.
West Virginia found a way to win that game.
I've been here for 100 games. I don't think I've ever seen this place as alive as it is tonight.
This is as loud a building as we have been in this season.
And the West Virginia University Mountaineers with an exclamation point victory over the number 4 Baylor Bears.
That's incredible. I mean, I think if you look at what's happened over the years, there's no place like this.
Now, let's roll out the carpet and bring on the Mountaineers.
Because this is home.
Mountaineer basketball fans everywhere can look to the future for more exciting basketball action in one of the nation's best arenas.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 3rd edition of the Mountaineer Masterminds WVU Alumni Webinar Series. My name is Kevin Berry, and I'm the Associate Director of the WVU Alumni Association. Joining me this afternoon is John Antonik, Director of Athletics Content for the WVU Department of Intercollegiate Athletics, author, and resident WVU sports historian. Today, we'll take an insider's view into WVU sports history, focusing on the first 5 decades of the WVU Coliseum. Points of conversation will include the move from the historic WVU Field House to the new facility, some of the great games, coaches, and players during the last 50 years, as well as some of the marquee non-athletic events that have taken place at the Coliseum since 1970. But before we get started, just a reminder, we'll be opening the conversation up to a Q&A during the second half of the webinar. So if you think of a question you'd like to ask our guest speaker, please feel free to drop it in the comments section, and we'd be happy to address your questions as long as time permits. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're joined by John Antonik. As Director of Athletics Content, John is responsible for editorial content, reporting, and feature writing for West Virginia University's Department of Intercollegiate Athletics website, WVUsports.com. He's also involved in the department's social media program, serves on the school's Sports Hall of Fame and all-time team committees for men's basketball and football, and is a contributor on the Mountaineer Sports Network from Learfield IMG football pregame show, Mountaineer Tailgate. A native of New Martinsville, Antonik earned a bachelor's degree in journalism from WVU in 1990 and a master's degree in sports management from WVU in 1992. He has authored 4 books on Mountaineer athletics: West Virginia University Football Vault, The History of the Mountaineers; Roll Out the Carpet, 101 Seasons of West Virginia University Basketball; The Backyard Brawl, Stories from one of the weirdest, wildest, longest-running, and most intense rivalries in college football history; and Saturday Snapshots, West Virginia University Football. John, thanks so much for being here with us to share an ultimate insider's view of 5 decades of the WVU Coliseum. I'm looking forward to learning about how the Coliseum came to be and about some of the great teams, coaches, and players who have called the facility their home. John, with that, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kevin. Again, thank you for having me. This is the 3rd one we've done. We started with the 40th anniversary of Mountaineer Field, and then we did a look back at the pandemic in 1918 and how it's impacted us today. And today we're going to talk about the 50th anniversary of the WVU Coliseum. It's hard to believe that the Coliseum will be enjoying its 50th year of existence this year, in a year that has been like any other. And first of all, before I get started, I hope everyone's doing okay. Their family members are safe. We're in very challenging times right now. It looks like we're going to continue to be in some challenging times for the immediate future. Hopefully we can get this vaccine ready to go and to everybody as soon as possible. Some encouraging news on that front we've heard today with that. So hopefully that can be a reality here sooner than later, and we can get back to some semblance of normalcy. But as I mentioned, this is the 50th anniversary of the Coliseum this year. And the facility that West Virginia University had before the Coliseum was the old Field House, as you can see right there. And the Field House was the home for West Virginia from 1929 to 1969. At the time, they had to take 2 installments from the state legislature to pay the thing off, which amounted to about $85,000 on the first installment, $170,000 on the second, and which comes out to about $3.7 million in today's money. I'm not sure you can build an arena for $3.7 million today, but the Field House again was a place that West Virginia called home for 40 years. Around the late 50s, when Jerry West and Rod Hundley were frequently packing the Field House, there was a discussion and a movement on campus about getting a new field house. Particularly in the late 50s, the year that they went, were number one in the country in 1958, finished the year number one. Fred Schaus had some opportunities for other coaching jobs. And the discussion then was about what can we do to improve either the facility, the old field house, or look at possibly building a new one. Red Brown was the athletic director at the time, and he was a little unusual because most of the athletic directors during that period had football backgrounds. Well, Red Brown was a basketball guy first and foremost, and a lot of the decisions that he made for the department were directly impactful to the basketball program. And his number one goal was always to get a field house, some type of arena that would be suitable for the program that West Virginia had become in the late 50s with Hot Rod Hundley and Jerry West. You know, I can remember Eddie Barrett telling me one time when he was in New York as a young publicist promoting West Virginia, all of the big writers there, Breslin and Young and all the big name New York reporters said, Eddie, you know, West Virginia's basketball tradition is second to none. Other than Kentucky, there's no school in the country that has a better basketball reputation than West Virginia at that time. And that's where West Virginia was in the late 50s and early 60s. So Red had each year when he would talk to the central administration, they would ask him to do a report at the end of the year, highlighting some of the things that went on in the department. And he would come up and list the records of the different teams and talk about things that were successful that year. And in each report that he would send to the administration, there was always a message or two about getting a new field house. He thought that was paramount to the West Virginia basketball tradition, particularly in the 1960s when the game was beginning to modernize. And at the time, West Virginia playing at the old field house, it was a great home field advantage for West Virginia playing there, but it was very difficult for WVU to get teams to come to Morgantown. Number one, because of the inaccessibility of the campus. Morgantown at the time, only 2-lane roads to get into Morgantown. We've talked about this before. Air travel wasn't what it is today. So Morgantown was a very difficult place to get to. That was number one. And number two, teams just didn't want to come here and play because they didn't want to get beat. You know, the fans were right on top of you at the old field house. Majority of the seating was along Beechhurst Avenue. For those of you that went to games here, you're aware of that. And also behind the basket, heading towards downtown. That's where the vast majority of the seating was at the field house. very difficult for teams. And a lot of the teams that came in here, some of them had some tough experiences. I know the last year before the Coliseum opened, there was a big fight in the field house between West Virginia and Syracuse, and they actually had to end the game prematurely. And I can remember talking to some of the Syracuse guys, and when they called the game, they actually got in their bus, and they were supposed to stay at the Holiday Inn. They just got out of town. They just got a police escort, got completely out of town after that game. So very tough place to play, the field house was. But in the late 1960s, there was beginning to be a movement. It was beginning to take hold. The state legislature was willing to consider appropriating some money for some university capital improvement projects. Obviously, the field house was the number one priority for the athletic department, but also the university was considering building a new law school, and there was also a consideration for an addition to the medical center. So what came out of the state legislature in 1967 was an appropriation for $20 million for the university to use to fund these capital projects. So once they got together and looked at the different alternatives, the price tag for what they came up with was twice the amount that was allocated. So there was some issues on campus. And I can remember Bucky Waters telling me that Red, the way Red Brown approached it is that he would do all of the work behind the scenes, talk to the politicians and do the things that needed to be done to get people on board in that respect. And then he expected Bucky to do the public campaigning, a lot of the stuff that was out front. He wanted Bucky to take a leadership role on that. And so in 1967, the big issue on campus was, okay, what do we do? Do we use the money to build a new law school? Do we use the money to do the refurbishment at the Med Center? And I know that there was a lot of concern on campus. The dean of the law school referenced the field house as Bucky's castle, and rightfully so, claiming this is an opportunity to build a law school. You're talking about classes and campus or in classrooms for the students. So there was some legitimate things that had to be worked out there. What came of it was the Board of Governors had a meeting in 1967, and they said, okay, each different unit, you're going to make a presentation. Bucky told me that he had planned this extensive 2-hour, multi-hour presentation with charts and graphs and things, and talking about what it would mean for the program to have a new arena. And when he was told by Red Brown that he had an audience with the Board of Governors, he had 10 minutes. So Bucky said, that means I've got 10 minutes to explain what we need an arena for. $10 million for 10 minutes is basically what it came out to be. And Bucky told me he went in there and he said, listen, he said, he just poured out his heart. He said, we've got right now, we've got Cole Field House next to us, which is a better place. You've got St. John's Arena at Ohio State, which is a better place. The Convocation Center at Ohio University, which is a nicer place. And we're surrounded by all these outstanding arenas. And I can't guarantee you that we can continue the Mountaineer tradition. We don't have the great run of state players like we had in the 50s when you had Mark Workman, and you had that great run of All-American players from Workman to Rod Hundley, to Jerry West, to Rod Thorne, to Ron Fritz Williams. The well was running dry, so there was no guarantee that West Virginia was going to continue to have the success that it did in that field house. Another thing that was coming on the horizon was Jim Carlin wanted out of the Southern Conference. He thought it was killing the recruiting in football. The Southern Conference really damaged West Virginia's reputation as far as football went, and he was in Red Brown's ear all the time. Hey, we got to get out of this league. It was a home for West Virginia's other sports, and it was access to the NCAA tournament for basketball. And so the basketball coaches at the time weren't real enthusiastic about leaving the Southern Conference, because that was their only way to get in the NCAA tournament. And if we get out of the Southern Conference, what are we going to do as an independent? Particularly in an old field house, an antiquated field house that had seen better days, at a place where it was very difficult to get people to come there to play anyway. So all of these things were kind of percolating when Bucky went into the Board of Governors to make his pitch, and he's like, "Hey, I'm not a miracle worker. We can't. We're not going to have the tradition that we had if we don't build this building." So he told me, he said he was in Red Brown's office, which was in the old Mountaineers football stadium, when the decision was made that they were going to approve. The Board of Governors was going to approve the new Coliseum. And so immediately the construction crews got on site, and they began working on building the Coliseum starting in 1967. And as a side note, obviously the law school came a little bit later, and also too the addition to the hospital. So the things that were on the table eventually happened. They just didn't happen immediately when the money was appropriated. Some things about the Coliseum that were unique at the time. First of all, as you can see in the picture there, they had to dig 32 feet down into the ground for the floor level of the Coliseum. Everything was built from that point up. There were 40 arches, as you can see, around to the tip of the dome there, and each one of those arches weighed 100 tons each, and all of those came together obviously to support the point of the dome. The top of the dome was 157 feet above the ground, which means you could fit the Twin Towers. At the time they were called the Twin Towers. There's 4 of them now, but you could fit the towers inside the Coliseum. 20 miles of electrical wiring in the Coliseum, 2,800 light fixtures, 17 air conditioners and heating units. There were 50 offices that were in the Coliseum, and the Coliseum really it was not just an athletic venue. One of the things that Red Brown knew he had to do to get this thing built was it had to be an all-purpose center. When this thing was built, the idea wasn't just that it was going to be built as a basketball arena. It was going to be a place to store the School of Physical Education. It was going to be a place where the ice capades could maybe have an event here, concerts, commencements. It was going to be not just a basketball arena, but a community center for the entire area. And if you think about what it did, is it delivered in that respect beautifully. Before the Coliseum, you had some events at the field house, but they were very limited because of the capacity of the field house. I know I was told stories where Dave Brubeck used to make his college tour, and he had concerts there, but they were more quaint types of events. When the Coliseum was constructed, there was the opportunity to have a lot more entertainment acts and so forth. And I'll mention a few of those toward the end of this. But this was what Red Brown had envisioned. It wasn't just a place for basketball to play, but it was a place for the community to have a place for entertainment, particularly during the wintertime when there wasn't a lot going on in Morgantown. Some of the upgrades that we've had through the years. Of course, right off the bat, 1971, the Coliseum was voted the outstanding concrete structure of the year by the American Concrete Institute. But the first refurbishment to the Coliseum didn't come until 1990, and that was the year that the first court redesign was done. And then it was also redesigned in 1992. In 1995, 96, the first year of the Big East basketball conference was the year that the new Daktronics scoreboard replaced the original scoreboard that was in the Coliseum. We used to call it Light Bright. But $1.6 million was invested in a new Daktronics scoreboard. In 2002, the drive encircling the Coliseum was renamed Gail Catlett Drive to recognize Gail Catlett's a great career coaching at West Virginia. And then the first major renovation for the Coliseum took place in 2004. And in that renovation, they actually addressed some issues with the roof. If you remember, for those of you who were on campus or remember at the time coming to town, there was some chipping going on and some leaking going on in the Coliseum roof. And that was addressed in 2004. There were new locker rooms, player lounge, team theater, a club area underneath the seating around in the lower level of the concourse there, and then also an expanded weight room and training area. That took place in 2004. 2007, of course, was the dedication of the Jerry West statue, which is outside the blue lot. Obviously, that was a great moment for a great player. In 2009, the first LED video board. There you can see the statue of Jerry West. 2009, we had the first LED video board was installed, and also a fourth court redesign. 2016, I think we have the picture of Hot Rod Hundley, the dedication of the Hot Rod Hundley statue. That was also outside the Blue Gate. And the same year that we did the Hot Rod Hundley statue dedication, we also installed a marquee. And that was through the department's relationship with Learfield IMG College Sports. And then in 2017, a year after that, was the biggest renovation up to this point that the Coliseum underwent, and that was $20 million to completely redo the concourse, the restrooms, the concession areas, new team locker rooms, a lot of things, and also a lot of things that were not done, I guess, above the ground. Bill Douglas told me one time that when he was the dean of the School of Physical Education, and they were right before Fred Schaus was hired as the athletic director. He had a meeting with some of the contractors to talk about some of the things going on at the Coliseum, and there were some significant issues with the facility underneath, things that maybe that weren't recognizable to the naked eye. And Shane Lyons, in this most recent renovation in 2017, addressed a lot of those issues that needed to be taken care of, with footers and things like that needed to be taken care of within the Coliseum. And of course, the most recent renovation just took place this summer through the generosity of Ken and Jennifer Mason. We got brand new seats in the Coliseum. All 14,000 seats were replaced, as you can see right there. That's a picture that I snapped earlier today. And the video board is they're actually working on it there. But the video board was also part of the most current renovations. And I'm told that the old video board could actually fit inside of it. That's how big this new one is. It's actually bigger than the video board at Madison Square Garden. So what's taken place and what's transpired over the last 50 years is amazing. And today I can tell you, I've worked here almost 30 years. I've spent more time in this building than I've spent any place else in my life, including where I grew up or where I live now. I've had more time in this building than any other place, and this Coliseum has never looked better. The refurbishments, the things that were done, the color coordination now in the Coliseum is amazing. I think this building looks half its age. I think the people that are responsible for all of the upgrading that's gone on over the last 3 years Director Lyons and his team should be commended, because this building is fantastic. And I know the people that have had an opportunity to get into the building, that see this, the Coliseum, it's impressive. It really is. And hopefully we can get everybody back in here sooner rather than later to enjoy all of the things that we have that have taken place in the Coliseum. So that's kind of a quick recap of the 50-year history. I know Kevin has some questions to ask, and I know if any of you have any questions to ask about the 50 years, we're going to unveil some Coliseum teams. We're going to unveil the 50 greatest players. We're going to unveil the 50 greatest opposing coaches. We worked on that all summer, and I'll be glad to go through some of that with Kevin here as we continue on with this. So, Kevin.
Hey, John, thanks for another great presentation. Just a reminder to all of our guests, if there's a question that you'd like to ask John, please drop it in the comments box. We'll do the best that we can to get to as many of those as possible. Before we get to the Coliseum, John, I wanted to just ask a couple questions about the Field House. So let's talk about the last game. Okay, so the Mountaineers built a very comfortable lead in the first half against the Pitt Panthers. They're later overtaken in the game. Can you talk for a few moments about that game as well as about the planned post-game celebration?
Well, yeah, there was a celebration planned for the game. It was the last game. They brought in some of the former great players. Sleepy Glenn was one of the players that West Virginia brought in. Charlie Hyatt was a Pitt All-American player from the 1930s. Both those guys, I believe, played in the first game ever played in the Field House in 1929. So they brought them back to have remarks at halftime. They were going to launch balloons at the end of the game. They were going to have the band play and have a performance. And West Virginia was up big in the first half and ended up blowing the lead, lost the game, and everybody just left. They didn't launch the balloons. The band didn't play. They just got out and left, and that was the last game ever at the Field House. So kind of a depressing ending to what was a great facility for WVU.
John, this tradition clearly started in the Field House and has been carried over to the Coliseum, but it's one that's beloved by so many of our fans. Can you take a minute and talk about the origins of the tradition of rolling out the carpet to bring on the Mountaineers?
Yes, it is a great tradition. I think it's one of the great traditions in all of college basketball. The carpet was the brain was Fred Schaus. That was all Fred Schaus. And Fred was interesting. He was a young coach at the time, and he was a guy who loved showmanship. For those of you who remember, obviously this predates me, but I was told this. Fred was really, he had the high knee socks that North Carolina popularized. He actually had his players shave their arms and their armpits because he thought that would make them more appealing to women. Fred thought that he could get women to come to the games if his guys were presentable and well groomed. So he did things like that. And so the carpet kind of followed along with that. They would warm up with a colored basketball that was gold and blue. They had a special basketball, and they did all of these pregame routines that they did, ball handling exhibitions and things like that. It was an event. It wasn't just a game. People that went to the games at the Field House back then, going from driving from some small town on a 2-lane road and taking forever to get there. And then when you get there and then you get to see the great Jerry West or Hot Rod Hundley warming up with a gold and blue basketball, and then to run out on that carpet. The carpet was the idea of a carpet salesman from Wonder Weave Carpeting. And he said, Fred, you ought to do this. You ought to have these guys run out on this carpet. And Fred says, that's a pretty good idea. Let's do that. So that's how it got started. And it became a tradition all through the Schaus years. George King maintained it. And then when Bucky Waters came, he ended it. And I think they ran out of they had a hoop that they ran out of. That was kind of the tradition at the time. A lot of the programs at the time were running out of a hoop with a message sign. They would run through that. And then Gail Catlett brought the carpet back, and it has been with us all through the Gail Catlett years. So from 1978 on, we've had the carpet, and I believe this is the second carpet. The original carpet is now in storage. I don't think it's been retired.
So John, WVU defeats Colgate on December 1st, 1970, the first game ever played in the 14,000-seat Coliseum. Since then, there's been more than 730 games played in the facility. Could you take a minute and talk about that first game, as well as why don't you share some of your personal favorites among the games that you've witnessed at the WVU Coliseum?
Well, the first game obviously was Colgate. It was December 1st, 1970. It was not the first event in the Coliseum. Grand Funk Railroad, a concert, was the first event in the Coliseum, which was what Red Brown wanted. You know, it wasn't just a basketball arena team; it was a community center. So the basketball game was the second major event to take place in the Coliseum, and a lot of the issues that seem to crop up today were prevalent right off the bat. Long lines of traffic to get into town or into the arena, inaccessibility for parking. You know, they touted at the time that there would be 1,400 parking spots for the new arena, which was an amazing amount more than they had at the old field house. But still, it wasn't nearly enough to match the people that could get into the, obviously a 14,000 capacity to have 1,400 parking spots. And at the time, the boulevard was just being constructed. It wasn't 4 lanes yet coming up from downtown through the boulevard. So there were traffic tie-ups getting into the arena. Only 9,000 came out for the first game. They were expecting a capacity crowd, but they got about 9,000. They did get a capacity crowd a few games later when Kentucky came, which was one of the great teams that came into the arena. And an interesting thing before I move on, one of the things that Red Brown had done was he had a lot of friendships with different ADs and coaches around the country serving on different committees and whatnot. And one of the things that he wanted to do was he wanted to bring some great teams into the Coliseum. Obviously, the relationship he had with Adolph Rupp brought Kentucky here. He also had planned to have UCLA come the first year to open the arena. And of course, this is at the time when John Wooden had it rolling with Lou Alcindor, later to be known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Sidney Wicks, and all of those guys in that great run of players. And one of the things that Red did was in Bucky Waters last year, he said, we'll come out and play a game at UCLA on our way out to play in the Far West Classic if you come back and return the game to Morgantown when we open our new Coliseum the following year. Of course, John Wooden, he said, sure, we'll do that. Well, he had no intention of bringing a team to Morgantown, West Virginia to play a college basketball game. And an interesting thing about John Wooden, a story that Bucky Waters told me, John Wooden is an iconic person, and he's got this persona as being someone who's grandfatherly and someone who, a good Christian. And he was all those things, but he was a competitor. And Bucky told me that when they played out there, that Wooden would take his program and roll it up into a little like a little megaphone, and he looked studious there, sitting on the sideline on his bench, and he'd have that program, and he'd have it down like this. And what he was doing with that program is that he was actually taunting the players. And a player, they would get one of the West Virginia players would get over near his bench, and he'd say, "You're going to turn it over. You're going to fumble the ball. Steal the ball. Turn it over." That type of thing. And Bucky, he said that he calls timeout, and the players come over, and he said, Coach Wooden's yelling at us. He said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, Coach Wooden's yelling at us from the sideline. Whenever we get over there, he's telling us to turn the ball over." And you would never think that, here's a guy who's such an iconic person, but it is true. Red tried to get UCLA to come back to the Coliseum. They said no, and it took them until Beeline years for them to finally return the game to the Coliseum. And it was good that they didn't come because they ended up losing.
Hey, so John, you said Grand Funk Railroad was the first event. Talk about some of the other marquee non-athletic events that have taken place in the facility.
It's funny. I've got a whole stack of papers here, and here's one of them. We have a list of all of the different events that have taken place at the Coliseum going back to 1970. Of course, I mentioned Grand Funk Railroad. And then after that, you had, let's see here, the Carpenters, Jesus Christ Superstar, which I guess would have been off Broadway, I would guess, right? That would have been a performance. Jethro Tull, the Isaac Hayes Show, James Taylor. And a funny story there, Dick Poland told me that Dick Poland, late, obviously people in the alumni remember the name Dick Poland, great guy. He was the SID here before he went on to greater fame working in the alumni business. And he told me one story one time. He said that when he was young, Red would ask him about some of these musical acts that they were bringing in. He's like, because Red was more of a hee-haw guy. He liked Buck Owens and Roy Clark and Liberace and things like that. And some of the younger guys on the staff were saying, you need to get some of these younger acts. And one of the acts that Red wasn't real keen on was James Taylor. And they talked, and he thought he was going to lose his shirt to James Taylor. And James Taylor ended up, I think, winning a Grammy that year. But these types of events all throughout the 70s and into the 80s, these things wouldn't have happened had there not been a Coliseum. And I have a list of the most prevalent, the ones that the acts that came here the most. Number one was the Globetrotters. 6 times the Globetrotters have performed in the Coliseum. After that, the next 4 are all country acts. Alabama was here 5 times. Hank Williams Jr. 4. Travis Tritt 4. And the Charlie Daniels Band 4 times. The top non-country act to perform at the Coliseum was the group Chicago 3 times. So a lot of, of course, today I look at the list of the some of the acts that are here. Da Baby, a Boogie with the Hoodie, Migos, Lil Wayne. I'm not sure any of you guys are familiar with any of this. I'm certainly not. So a lot of different acts have played in here through the years.
Hey, John, question from our audience. Did the rifle range move to the Coliseum from the old stadium?
No, it went to the natatorium. But we did have an event 2 years ago. We had an NCAA tournament event in the Coliseum, thanks to a contribution made by former kicker Bill McKenzie, who contributed money for a mobile rifle range. We were able to have the NCAA championships in the Coliseum a couple of years ago, and we set the attendance record. We had over a couple thousand fans for the NCAA rifle championships a few years ago. So there have been, and obviously, and I failed to mention, it's not just a basketball arena. Women's basketball is played, gymnastics, wrestling, different events in this venue through the years have been the home to a lot of great athletes.
So, John, after entering the Coliseum as an independent program, WVU, at least by my count, has competed in 4 leagues since the building opened. The Eastern Collegiate Athletic Conference, Atlantic 10, Big East, and Big 12. Talk a little bit about the evolution of WVU's basketball conference affiliation during the last 50 years.
Well, you're right. And right off the bat, the big move was getting out of the Southern Conference. And I know from talking to Sonny Moran, obviously Sonny passed away a few years ago, but he had some interesting things to say about that. First of all, the basketball coaches weren't all that keen on it because, again, it was their access to the NCAA tournament. And if you remember back then, there weren't that many NCAA tournament bids. To get an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament was very, very difficult. You were going to have to play a schedule that was going to be pretty difficult. And that's what West Virginia did. They were replacing schools that they were playing annually in the Southern Conference with home and homes against Pitt, Syracuse, Maryland, Kentucky was on the schedule, NC State. Virginia, they had a long series with Virginia, Wake Forest. So there was in Notre Dame, a long running series with Notre Dame each year. So they were playing some of the best teams in the country. And I know that for Sonny, I think a big thing with his program, number one, you had the immediate upgrade in the schedule. Number two, there weren't as many homegrown players as they were getting in the past. When you look at the West Virginia team that went to the finals just 10 years prior to the Coliseum opening in 1959-60, the vast majority of those players were from small towns in West Virginia. There were only a couple guys on the roster that weren't from the state of West Virginia. So Fred Schaus could get a team good enough to reach the national championship game from players basically from West Virginia or from right around the immediate Morgantown area. Well, what happens? Well, the state has an economic downturn in the 60s. A lot of the coal mines that were filling up these towns all around, the chemical plants in Charleston, the steel in the northern panhandle, a lot of that stuff was slumping, and a lot of those towns, a lot of those people in those towns were moving out of the state. So by the 1970s, West Virginia didn't have access to the players that they had just 10 years before. So that was part of it. You're playing a tougher schedule, which was part of it. And then the third thing that really impacted West Virginia basketball at that time was the tragic car wreck. And the car wreck that claimed Deacon Harris' life and paralyzed Oglesby, Sam Oglesby. Levi Phillips was declared academically ineligible. And I remember Sonny Moran telling me at the time that, he had passing grades. It was just a procedural thing that cost him to be eligible. So he lost a lot of players off of what he thought was going to be a really good team, a team that he thought was good enough to play in a regional, which that year was going to be hosted at the WVU Coliseum. Red Brown had managed to get the NCAA East Regional to the Coliseum in 1972, and Sonny thought he had everything building toward that team. The car wreck happened. They had some other guys that were injured, totally decimated, and he never recovered. 2 years later, he was fired, and they were rebuilding with Jody Gardner. And it really didn't stabilize until Gail Catlett came in the early 80s.
John, question from the audience. Do you know why the sidewalks around the Coliseum are red instead of blue?
I don't. That's a good question. I'll have to ask about that. I know that the apron, it's an asphalt. It's an asphalt, and so it's just a coloring agent that's put on the asphalt to preserve it, to keep it from cracking and whatnot. Who knows? Maybe perhaps one day something can be done with that whole area around there, and maybe dress it up a little bit. I know that's something that's been discussed, although I don't think there's anything imminent.
Hey, John, let's turn to the 1999-2000 year. The Mountaineers that year were the ultimate road warriors. They played every game on the road. Their home games were moved to Charleston and Wheeling because asbestos was being removed from the Coliseum. Let's talk a little bit about that season and the work that was done at the facility.
I lived that. I know that very well. I was probably 9 years into my tenure here when we had to move, and we actually moved out of the Coliseum. And they had us dispersed around town. We had to rent a office building over on Collins Ferry Road, and we had our whole department there, with the exception of the ticket office. The ticket office was above the United Bank, where the Starbucks is now. So that's where they ran the ticket office while they were abating the asbestos in the Coliseum. And I can remember. Maybe a year or two before, coming to work and seeing a bunch of guys walking around in spacesuits, testing the air, and I'm thinking, this doesn't look right. And eventually, they had to. A couple of pieces of the ceiling had fallen off, and asbestos was dispersed when the concrete came off of the ceiling. So they had to abate it. It had an impact. And I know Gil Catlett had mentioned to me one time, that was a pretty good team. And if you remember, that team at one point had a pretty good record, but by the end of the year, the traveling, flying down to, busing down to Charleston and flying back, or busing over to Wheeling. They played some games at the Wheeling Civic Center. They played some games at the Charleston Civic Center. By the end of the year, that team was totally spent, and a team that maybe could have been an NCAA tournament team. By the end of the year, they had totally the travel had totally gotten them. It was an unfortunate year for them. It was, but obviously something that was necessary, that needed to be done to get the Coliseum, up to par.
Hey, John, another question from our audience. Do you know how the name the Coliseum was chosen for the facility?
Good question. Again, you guys are stumping me with these. I don't know. That is a good question. I have to do some research on that. I guess you're giving me something to do for December.
Hey, John, so let's be honest. It's not very often that an individual's name becomes a verb, right? And in 2005, that happened. Can you talk for a moment about the phenomenon known as being Pitsnoggled?
Yeah, Kevin Pitsnoggle, he was such a fun player to watch. And, when I think of the great players that played at the Coliseum, obviously you see Kevin there. I would include him. If I had to pick five, I would say Will Robinson is a name. Obviously, I'm sure everyone here remembers. Scored more points than anybody in the Coliseum. I think of Greg Jones. Was a wonderful player for Gail Catlett. I don't think he ever I think he was a guy that didn't totally fulfill his promise. I think he could have had a long career in the NBA. Deshaun Butler, Javon Carter, and Kevin Pitsnoggle. Those would be the five guys that I would want to pay to see play in the Coliseum. And Kevin, what made Kevin so special was he was one of us. He was a guy from Martinsburg. He shot threes. He was a center that shot threes. And think about this. Had Kevin, when Kevin committed, Gail Catlett was the coach, who played a completely different style than John Beilein. Had Kevin played for Gail Catlett, I'm not sure he has the career that he has and doesn't become the iconic player that he becomes had he not played for John Beilein, because Kevin was perfect for what Beilein did. And the other thing about Kevin is that he kind of played off of Mike Gansey. Mike Gansey was the guy that took the ball to the rim and got knocked to the ground and did all the dirty work, while Kevin was the guy that got to penetrate and pitch and was the guy that shot the threes. So it was a really unique system. It was something that was John Beilein-esque, and it was a great time. And I thought it was a time that really reinvigorated the fans and energized people in the state. Because he was such an iconic guy. Here's a guy who, ate pizza and drank beer and shot threes. What more could you ask for?
So you've covered top players. Let's go ahead and transition. Who are some of the great coaches during the Coliseum here?
There have been a lot of great coaches here, and we came up with a list of 50, and it wasn't hard to do at all. I mean, we could have added a lot more. The five that I think, in my opinion, were the best, in no particular order. Actually, I picked six. I think Jim Boeheim, if you look at the record that Syracuse had here, some of the great teams, some of the greatest players that have played in the Coliseum, all the way back to the 70s. When I think of Bowie and Orr and those guys, Jim Boeheim is one. I think Jim Calhoun, Connecticut, you're talking about some great teams, particularly during those early Big East years. Bobby Knight actually coached here. He brought an Army team here the second year of the Coliseum. Adolph Rupp, Kentucky. Dean Smith didn't coach against the Mountaineers, but Dean Smith coached in the Coliseum in the 1972 NCAA Regional. Actually won the regional, went to the Final Four that year. And then the other guy I would probably put on that list would be Jay Wright for Villanova. I think as far as a developmental coach and a guy who doesn't necessarily recruit all of the McDonald's All-Americans, he gets good players, but not necessarily a roster full of McDonald's All-Americans. He's done an unbelievable job at Villanova. So those would be the guy. I actually picked 6. Those would be the guys. I mean, but of course you got Rick Pitino, you've got Jamie Dixon, Lefty Drizel, Denny Crum, John Chaney. How could you forget John Chaney there? So there's been so many great coaches, so many great characters, and it's what made the Coliseum so fun to be a place to be.
So, John, a little birdie has told me that there's a feature in the works, which is going to include a 16-team tournament of great WVU teams that have played in the Coliseum. And fans are going to have the opportunity to vote for their favorites. If that's the truth, who would be your Final Four out of WVU teams that have played in the Coliseum?
Yeah, your birdie's right. Our digital, our social media folks are cooking something together for later this year where they're going to have a bracket. They're going to pick. They're going to have a 16-team bracket. They're going to pick. Have you have the ability to choose the top team, seeding it from 1 to 16. My 5 would be obviously Huggins' 2010 team. That one was a fantastic team. I would say the Huggins 17-18 team, which went to the Sweet 16. That was the team that almost beat Gonzaga out in California and could have had a run. I mean, that team was really good. I think Beeline's team that went to probably the Sweet 16 team was probably better than the Elite 8 team. If you think about it, played a tougher schedule, had a little bit of a tougher draw, maybe in the NCAA tournament, having to face Texas earlier than they maybe should have. Had they won some of those earlier season games, I remember they lost a game to LSU that really hurt them that year as far as the seeding goes. But the 2004-5, 5-6 teams, really, I think those are together. And then I think Gale's team in '98 that made the Sweet 16 with Damian Owens beat Connecticut here, a great win. When ESPN was here, I mean, Dick Vitale was calling the game, and it was a memorable game. And then the other team, I think that you could probably either pick the 82 team that won all of those games. Me, personally, I thought the 89 team might have been a little bit better than the 82 team just because the 82 team really didn't play that very difficult of a schedule. The 89 team was a great defensive team that year, had a long winning streak like the 82 team, and ended up tripping up in the Atlantic 10 tournament, but won a game in the NCAA tournament and then lost to a really good Duke team in the second round. Those would be the teams that I would pick right off the top of being maybe some of the best in the Coliseum.
John, so Inside Sports once rated the Coliseum one of the 10 most unfriendly venues in college basketball. Eric Metcalf, who writes for ESPN.com, said that you don't want to go to the Coliseum, you just want to get out of there. And I could be mistaken, but in looking at home records, it appears to me as though the Mountaineers have only suffered through a losing record in the Coliseum twice in the last 50 years. Can you talk a little bit about the home court advantage the Mountaineers have enjoyed throughout the years?
Well, there was a home court advantage, and at one time, when that Inside Sports story was done in the 80s, West Virginia wasn't packing the arena consistently like it does today. You would get maybe actually Gale's 82 was the first year that West Virginia averaged more than 10,000 a game in the Coliseum. So there was some lean years there in the 70s. People would come to – I can remember as a kid coming to the game, the Notre Dame game, and sitting up in the rafters. And West Virginia was actually in that game at halftime, and then lost it in the second half. There was a big crowd for that. But a lot of the big crowds were pretty rare until Gale Catlett got here. And one of the difficulties that some of the coaches talked about at that time was that it wasn't full, and there was an atmosphere here, but it was kind of an eerie, unsettling atmosphere because the arena was dark. I can remember talking to the Pitt players. They say, they always said it was tough to shoot in the Coliseum because you didn't have a lot of good depth perception because of the way that it was dark. I can remember interviewing Austin Carr one time, and he said, when we came, it was like looking at a big clam stuck in the middle of the mountains. It's like, where are we going? What is this place here? And then, it's like it takes forever to get to Morgantown, and then you get here, and then it's not completely full. It's dark. It's eerie. So there was some unsettling. And then they were gonna face a team that was gonna press you and get up and down the floor, particularly when Gail Catlett was the coach here. So always a tough, unsettling venue. And then, of course, when Huggins got here and really got turned it up, and we started getting the big crowds consistently, the atmosphere really, really took off. And to me, I've been to a lot of different arenas, and this ranks right up there with some of the great arenas in the country in terms of atmosphere and environment and things that go on. And it's certainly earned its reputation through the years.
Hey, John, question from one of our participants. Do you know if there's an online or virtual tour of the Coliseum?
We do have some things on the website. A virtual tour, I'm not sure about. We do have some things, and we have a Coliseum 50 website that is going to be out there for people to see with some videos, like the video that you watched in the presentation at the beginning. There's going to be more special videos, more photos, more special clips that are going to be unveiled during the year. Some of that stuff will be a part of it.
John, another question, getting close to wrapping up here, but let's just take a minute and talk about the 2020 through 21 Mountaineers. In a recently released preseason KenPom rankings, and by the way, KenPom uses advanced analytics to predict team efficiency. The Mountaineers are ranked 8th in the country, and there are 5 Big 12 teams in the top 10. What are your predictions for this year's team?
It's going to be first of all, let's knock on wood that we can get through the year. I think that that's going to be, to me, I think the season, the national champion this year may not be the best team. It may be the team that deals with the pandemic the best. Maybe the team that remains intact or is able to handle all the things that are going on right now. If you look, the opening tournament, the Bad Boys Mower Classic that's taken place in South Dakota, we had it's just kind of been a revolving deal there. Texas A&M pulled out yesterday, and they're going to be replaced by Northern Iowa. Ohio State pulled out of that tournament. Dayton pulled out. Utah pulled out. So what was supposed to have been Texas A&M, Ohio State, Dayton, Utah, Creighton, and Memphis, Wichita State, has now been dramatically changed. I think some of that's going to take place this year. If we can have a season, I think this could be the best the Big 12 maybe ever. You're talking about, I saw a list of the top 100 players in the country. CBS Sports did it last week, and they listed the different players. West Virginia had 3 of them on that list. I can't ever remember anyone considering West Virginia having 3 of the top 100 players in the country in college basketball. Baylor had 4. Kansas, Texas Tech, Texas, Oklahoma all had multiple guys on that list. So there are a lot of great players in the Big 12. There are a lot of great teams in the Big 12. There are a lot of great coaches. And if we can have a basketball season and we can get through it all, and we can get to having a Big 12 tournament in the springtime, and then, of course, an NCAA tournament, I think West Virginia could be right there. I think they're as good as anybody in the country. I think the unity, the closeness of this team is off the charts. And as you know, in basketball, that's very important because you don't have a whole bunch of players. They're around each other a lot. And when you have a close, tight-knit group, that usually bodes well for your season. And I think Huggins has that this year.
Hey, John, if people want to learn more about the WVU Coliseum and the teams, coaches, and players that call it home, or about the different books that you've authored, where can they go?
Well, we have a website, WVUsports.com. That's where I write daily. We're doing feature stories. We'll have things online throughout the year to sprinkle in on the anniversary of the 50th anniversary of the Coliseum. Social media. And I don't know how many of your users on here are on Twitter, but we're on Twitter daily. We're always putting things out. Our Twitter account for basketball is WVU Hoops. We're tweeting stuff. A lot of these videos will be on Twitter. I also tweet myself, my name. And then we have a Facebook page where we also put out a lot of content. It's interesting because when I got into this business, none of that stuff was around, and we would put things on this website and people would go there. Now we have to go to social media. We have to go to our Facebook page, Instagram, all these different things to bring people back to us on the website. So it's a little bit different. And of course, you mentioned the books. I have a basketball book, Roll Out the Carpet. I don't know if it's still in print. I think you might still be able to get a copy on Amazon. You can Google my name. I have 3 other books that I've written on football that are out there. 2 of them are still in print. It can be purchased on Amazon as well. You can just type in my name and you can see all the books that are out there. So all 3 of the 4 were published by WVU Press, which is here on campus, and did a wonderful job.
Well, we're just about out of time, folks. Once again, I'd like to thank John for the informative presentation about the first 50 years of the WVU Coliseum. And also, I'd like to thank him for agreeing to be our first Mountaineer Mastermind Series presenter. John, don't want to put you on the spot here, but is there any chance we could convince you to do a reunion tour with us at some point in the future?
Sure. Enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm losing my voice. My voice isn't strong enough to talk for an hour straight, but I enjoy it, and I love reminiscing and being able to just tell stories with great Mountaineers all over the place.
Well, I'll tell you, we certainly at the Alumni Association think that's great news, and my guess is that our participants do as well. Our next WVU alumni webinar, titled WVU Check-In, an inside look at the Art Museum of WVU, featuring Director of the Art Museum, Todd Tabitis, and Educational Programs Manager, Heather Harris, will take place on Wednesday, December 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic of the conversation is the stories behind the more than 4,000 pieces of art in the museum's unique collection and the creative ways it's being shared with our community. Please make sure and join us. For those of you that may be wondering, our Mountaineer Masterminds webinar series will pick back up on January 20th. Please watch our webinar website and monthly electronic newsletters for more information about our next Masterminds topic and guest speakers. Thanks again for watching, everyone. We look forward to seeing you on December the 2nd.